Hey everyone, I'm here today with Arjun Kannan, the co-founder of ResiDesk. Arjun, tell me a little bit about what ResiDesk does.
So ResiDesk, we build software for rental properties. So we help owners and operators of rental units, so think apartment buildings you've lived in or anywhere that you've rented, actually solve for Business 101, which is talk to your customer to understand how to build a better business. So if you live in one of our properties, we have a text concierge that's talking to you from the day you move in to the day that you move out, helping you solve problems and basically get a five-star experience across your time. If you've ever rented, you know that rental generally sucks. We're trying to make that better. And in doing that, we're helping owners and operators in real estate, which is honestly an industry that hasn't changed in a very long time, get a handle on what people actually want, what makes them stay, what makes them leave, and how to better build, buy, and develop properties with the larger goal of effectively changing the way that housing works in the US and globally, which is it's always been a financial data-driven industry, and we're turning it into a customer data-driven industry.
That's really cool. What particularly about this product or vision gets you super excited? Why did you decide to start the company?
So my co-founders and I think, all came at this from different angles. Everybody's been a renter. We live in New York City. It's expensive. It's the most expensive thing that you spend your money on, and yet it sucks. Like, I get better service from the bodega. And we got to thinking about why I came. I've seen this also from a financial angle, and my co-founders have seen this from a data and real estate angle. But when it came to thinking about why, it is because as rental companies scale, something that they start losing is touch with their residents. We tried to think about how to give them visibility into what renters want, because if you, again, anybody who's rented has the experience of like screaming into the void about the fact that they don't want the fancy new pool table. They want just better locks on their doors, right? And yet nothing ever happens. When you get to thinking about why, it's because there's a feedback loop that is broken between what you say and what the people who actually make the decisions hear. And when we looked at it, it was because nobody was ever actually listening to what you say. And so we were like, that seems really interesting. We also were thinking about why does that exist, is because we're in an industry that hires effectively they hire a middleman to manage their property, right? If you own a building, you hire somebody to manage it. That person's not incentivized to actually understand your customer. And so we saw a clear opportunity here, literally just to connect a business with its customers. It's a pattern that has played out literally across every business in history, is just talk to your customers and you'll figure out how to make it run better. So we're helping them talk to it at scale, right? Like, this is what successful companies have done, from Palantir to Qualtrics to everybody else, is just get at what is happening on the ground. Because of that, you also help with what is happening on the ground, but then get the truth of what's going on back to the owner so they can understand what's going on.
So why now? Like, what has changed that enables this business to be built right now?
Short answer is LLMs. Larger answer, I would say, is two things. One, from a technology perspective, LLMs help you scale conversations significantly, and we take a different approach. We have humans in the loop, both for technology and product reasons. We'll get into that later. But then there's a more macro thing going on, which is real estate is finally transitioning from being sort of a legacy family held industry to being a much more institutional industry. Everybody's seen the headlines about more and more rental properties are generally owned by professional owners. Without getting into sort of the social and marketplace angle of that, like, we do know that there are going to be more and more professionally owned and run real estate properties. And the first thing that professionals come in and do is try to understand where they are, right? And so very quickly, we're getting to a point where most real estate is going to have professionals running it as opposed to mom and pop owners and operators. And when they come in, we want to be there to give them an angle into the properties that benefits everybody, not just the bean counters, but the people who actually live in those properties. And so that's the big why now. And then on top of that, of course, is coming back to LLMs that allow us to scale conversations so you can talk to every resident once a quarter, which is physically impossible when you have one person at the property talking to 500 people.
That's cool. I saw on one of the videos that I watched that you guys are doing like 1 million conversations a month. Is that roughly right? So how do you do that with...
We're up to 2, I think, now.
Up to 2. Congrats.
Yeah.
Good growth. So how do you do that with humans in the loop? I'd love to hear kind of how that whole thing works.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we think about it is that unlike the traditional idea of humans in the loop, which is AI runs a workflow over and over again, and then the humans in the loop are basically just like QA teams. The way we work with it is AI exists to understand everything about a property, right? Like everything from when does the pool close to, how do I bring, what types of pets are allowed to, how do I talk about emergencies in a way that supports the resident, whatever. Like we understand that context and we use it to understand every message that comes in. So we are texting residents back and forth, understand every message that comes in, and then provide an answer that connects back to the guidelines, which is, here's how you talk to Amit about X, Y, and Z, et cetera. But the way we scale it is that we've built software in-house. I think of it almost like an extended version of a priority inbox, like a superhuman, if you will, that has our dedicated team talking to residents at each of our customers' properties. And they basically come into an inbox that is already pre-filled with like suggested drafts. And so their objective function is not just to course correct the AI where possible. AI is on a trajectory where it's going to get to better than human level fairly quickly, but they can then let it do its job of making sure that like Amit's door is getting fixed, and then follow up by asking if your experience of the property was actually good, understanding the sort of back and forth of your experience at the property overall, and providing empathy, right? So we think about it as it is not AI with humans in the loop as a defensive function. It's AI plus humans in the loop as a sort of investment function of we'll solve your problems and help you voice your concerns, your successes, everything that has to do with your time at the property so that we can make the whole experience better. And that's something that humans are better equipped to do than anybody else.
Makes sense. And you guys are doing this with a fairly small team, right? How many people work at the company?
So we have 5 people full time, including the 3 co-founders, soon to be 6. And yeah, one of our goals from day one has been figuring out how to create the most leverage through our tech, through our tools, to help our team scale up much faster than you would with a traditional startup. I would say, in fact, one of the things that we care about the most and we put in our job descriptions everywhere is just everybody here is a high autonomy builder. And that sounds like a lot of buzzwords, but it just basically means they can get things done. And the thing we try to do is hire good people and get out of their way, right? And give them the resources, whether that is, VAs offshore or AI tools or whatever it might be, to help them sort of lever up the things that they do that take them time day after day after day, right? Like 80% of the company, 80% of what every company does is kind of the same. So if you can get that to maybe like 60% of people's time, then you just freed up basically double your headcount, right?
That makes
sense.
So
that's how we think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
So is that, like, I'd love to hear a little bit about the culture. Is that kind of the core tenet, basically leverage, owners, autonomy? Like what else is, when you think about the company that you're building, what are the types of people, what are the types of behaviors that you'd like to have?
We think about it, I think you nailed it, right? Like it is high ambition, high autonomy builders who can also take a lot of context. And when I say builders, I don't mean just people who can write code, right? It is basically people who think in systems. One of the best things that has happened in the course of building the company is that the feedback loops around our product are kind of built into the daily motion of our product, right? We are talking to residents every single day. And so we are inundated with ways to make the product better, the sale better, the things that matter to our customers better every single day. And so the thing that could stop us from turning that into value is just our ability and our team's ability to handle that level of context without drowning in the sort of implementation details of moving things forward. And so basically, we have a situation where we have a company that is already drinking from a fire hose of valuable data. And so we want people who are able to drink from a fire hose and then turn it into value. And that's really tempting if we can pair that with, you can take whatever tools you need to make it work.
So it's very interesting because you guys are building for a lot of different groups. Like you're building for the customer, which is or the actual user, which is the residents. You're also selling to probably the property managers, and you're also building for your internal team so they can support the residents. Tell me a little bit about how that translates in the day-to-day. Is it basically fine? Like, what's the pros, cons, some of the challenges?
I would say the first thing you have to figure out when you're dealing with multiple parties is just where is the win-win-win across each of those situations, right? And that is more or less the beginning and the end of it. Once you understand where you can create mutually beneficial situations, then you can roll that out into your product decisions, into your sales decisions, into your culture decisions, into your company decisions. So I'll give you an example, right? Like one of the things that we decided early on is basically to not throw property managers under the bus. If that makes sense. Because if you can imagine, literally any building that you go into, first thing residents are going to do is complain about all the things that haven't been fixed over the last 2 years. That's great. Those are valid concerns. But the most likely assumption, if you take it in good faith, is that it's because the team managing the property is underwater, overwhelmed, and doesn't have the tools to keep up with everything that's in front of them. And to the people who own the property, it is imperative that while we give them the constructive feedback from the residents, we're also showing just how much of that constructive feedback is not being implemented because your teams are busy. So that's kind of it. Like if you can optimize for assuming that every counterparty in your system is coming in with good faith, then everything else sort of flows from there, right? We come in assuming that the teams want to do a good job. Our internal teams want to talk to our residents. The residents actually want to have a better experience. They're not just complaining to complain. And the owners actually want to keep their teams happy while improving the property for the residents. This sounds really obvious, I'm sure, but it is interesting when you work with an industry that has been sort of effectively incentivizing a Mexican standoff between all of these folks, just how much taking things in good faith transforms the industry, right? Like they can't even agree on the ground truths most of the time. And by being sort of the calm mediator, sort of showing everybody exactly what's going on and how it's being perceived, we are able to sort of walk that line pretty effectively.
That's cool. So you and your co-founders have been in the industry for a while. You've been at small companies, big companies. What are you taking from those experiences when thinking about building your company now?
So I think it's a little bit different for each of us, but it comes down to, I would say we have all worked with companies where the talent is kind of the end of it, right? Like we worked with companies where the first sort of not great person you hire is the start of the company slide into being okay instead of great. So things that we've taken from our previous experiences is you don't have to fall into that trap. I think if you can be truthful about what you're offering to your teams, then you will find people that are aligned with the way that you want to run your business. So to put an even finer point to it, right? I think most companies start having talent challenges and therefore execution and speed of iteration challenges when they sort of shift from selling the vision of what they're trying to do into selling the day-to-day perks and benefits of the job, right? And so one of the biggest takeaways for us is to never deviate from that, right? Like our goal from day zero to day infinity will just be making the living experience better across the board by creating mutually beneficial solutions for renters and owners. And like that is very different than selling the sort of perks and benefits of the job, than selling the salary range or any of that stuff. It's all really important. I don't mean to diminish any of that stuff at all, but you have to bring people in who really care about what you're trying to do and be okay with the fact that this is not going to be everybody's passion.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there other things in your mind that startups potentially do wrong based off of your career in startups?
Not capturing context, I think, is number one. So like there's a lot of, I mean, startups live and die on iteration cycles and feedback loops, right? And so until recently, I think the general idea was, okay, your sales team handles your calls and then your product team kind of intermediates and then your engineers build. I think we're very quickly shifting to a paradigm where everybody has access to all of the data all the time. Like it is really hard for an engineer to build what a customer needs if their only knowledge is filtered through sales and then product to engineering and then back through product and then back to sales, which is 6 cycles that should be 1 cycle. And so something that we emphasize quite a lot is just we record everything, we analyze everything, we have AI assistants to talk through everything. Everything's kind of off the shelf, right? Like between Otter and Notion and Make and Gemini and whatever else you want, it is actually possible now to access the company's entire institutional knowledge without having to tap somebody on the shoulder, right? And so what that does for us is it flips the conversations that we have in person, which are still incredibly important. Those conversations shift from sharing information and facts to ideating about what we do next, right? So you start getting every conversation that you have, instead of being a first conversation, is a second conversation. And so that to us has been the most important thing. If you can find ways to share context effectively, you can, I think, next the cycle time of your business.
And you guys are partially remote, right? Or are you guys full-time in New York?
But we try to be full-time in New York. The way we think about it is in-person is incredibly important when it's intentional, and it's terrible when it's not. So we try to inject intentionality into what we require in person, which is great candidates. Depending on life circumstances, depending on where they are, we never want to say no to a candidate that is remote, but we do want them to spend some time with us at the beginning of their tenure. We'll bring them over here, we'll work with them, and then we want to see them every so often. But you have to inject intentionality into it, right? Like there's no point in being in person when just to rely on random collisions of information that you can never predict. Instead, it's much easier to say, okay, here's how we share information. We will always be online. You will never be a second-class citizen if you're sort of remote or async. You will never lack the information that you get from being in the office. But when we're in the office, here's how we use that time to create sort of intense bursts of productivity and creative energy, and also to just get to know each other and enjoy our time together as a team.
That makes sense. I mean, it's also that context, right? It's when people are in person, aligning on context, getting deep on that context seems a lot easier than it is being fully remote. And coming from a person who runs a fully remote company, I've totally experienced that. In person definitely has a little bit of an above on that.
Yeah, when the bandwidth is just higher.
Exactly. When you think about building your team and selecting talent, like what are the things that really help candidates stand out that maybe they're not doing?
I think there are three key factors. First is, I would say, research and intentionality. And so we try to put as much as possible out there in the job description. And I want candidates to come in and talk about specifically why they would be good for this type of role. This would have been very hard to do in the pre-LLM age, but today I think that is pretty much at any candidate's fingertips. So that's number one. Number two to us is curiosity. I want to understand from candidates what they did in their last role, side project, whatever it is. People always say side projects, but I think of it as curiosity, right? Which is when's the last time you went sort of out of your way to build or do something that was not in your mandate that changed something for the better, right? Could be a small business, could be a design page because you wanted to learn design, could be anything. But I want to understand the intentionality behind the curiosity as well, because a lot of their goals here will be to come in and figure out how to do things. And then the third thing would be the high watermark is I want to believe that this person is a future founder or future executive, whatever that might be. And the way I think about it is when's the last time they broke the rules of something that they were supposed to. So all of these things come together, right? If you look at our job posting, you will see that we very specifically want high autonomy builders. And if you were to do any research on that at all, or any of the material that's available about us, I think you will quickly come to the conclusion that the best way to put yourself in front of us is to show that you are capable of going beyond your mandate, so to speak, and you're not afraid of doing things that aren't in the rule book.
So what does that look like practically? Like when they apply, should they talk about those particular things after doing the research? Makes sense. And when you guys are going out sourcing for candidates, meaning the ones that are not necessarily applying to you, are there ways that you look at a resume and there's the curiosity thing? I see that they can be an executive in the future. Are there specific things that you're looking for?
There's not a ton you can get from a resume, just to be really honest. I think resumes conceal more than they reveal. I think you can get past some basic questions. A lot of it, what I'm looking for is flexibility. Have they been part of multiple teams within the same company? Have
Mm.
they done a small team, big team, customer facing, business facing, whatever it might be? I look for evidence in a resume that they've held roles that have had them exercise sometimes sort of opposing skills, right? Like somebody who's done compliance and then shifted into an advertising role is like really interesting as an example. Because like one is a super slow grind, like get all the details right. And the other one is like a fast iterational sort of experimental role. And that could be replaced by, small company, then big company, academia, then industry, research project, then optimizing a big existing production project. And I look for evidence that they've actually shipped something. So if it's a salesperson, it is hitting targets. And if it's an engineer or product person, it is being able to point to things that you've released. That's about as much as you can get from a resume, though. The rest of it, we look at. So it's really just a first screen to understand if this person is interested and curious. And then the rest of it is in their conversations, right? Like how much do they understand everything that we just talked about, flexibility, autonomy, all of that stuff. And then the best argument you can make is, and this is something we can do as a startup, is to be able to set up a work sample test, right? And I don't mean just like here's a written test, go do it, but instead, will you be willing to work with us paid for like a couple weeks and see if you like working with us and we like working with you? That's when you often really get to understand all of these skills.
How do you think about this in the age of LLMs and just interviewing in general in the age of LLMs? Have you guys changed your approach, or is the challenge basically the same in terms of getting people to do the work sample and get the results?
The challenge with the work sample is almost exactly the same, but the approach to anything upstream of that, whether that's like cover letters or sample projects or whatever, is much easier, I think, in the age of LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make it work for you. So everything that we would do would just be an open book test, right? Like if we do a coding pairing thing, we just do an open book test. Or like, I actually want to see how you use the LLMs.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I've changed in the process. Is just like you have access now to everything you could possibly want. And that's what the job also looks like, right? Like I trust, and this is mostly because we're hiring for experienced candidates, but like I trust that you have the basic skills, right? I'm not here to do a lead code test. What I want to understand is, how do you think about iteration? How do you think about reviewing your own work? How do you think about understanding the context of our code base? And those are all things that, earlier you would have to send somebody a bunch of stuff and have them do a bunch of research and then go from there. Today, you could probably suss that out in a couple hours of sitting down with them and pairing on a simple exercise, because it's just like, here's Cursor, here's ChatGPT, here's Gemini, whatever you want. And like, ask any questions you want. Here's the thing that we're going to try and change. And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see how they go through it with us.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, for us, like, I think your ability to use LLMs effectively is actually as important as your ability to code at this point, because it's going to give you so much leverage to do everything else. So it makes a lot of sense. Just taking a step back, when you're pitching a candidate on why work at ResiDesk, what is kind of your short pitch of why should people join your company? Why is it a great place to work?
Yep. So again, we boil it down to three things. First is, most important is the problem, right? You understand that renting sucks. It hasn't gotten better in decades. We are the first company that actually has a real shot at changing that. And so if you want to improve the living experience for everybody who rents, regardless of how they are set up, it's a great place to come and solve a hard problem with us. That beats everything else. Second is then the team, right? Which is, you want to come in and work with folks who are really motivated to solve hard problems, but are also insanely creative. And so you have access to all of us in a way that you wouldn't in a later stage company or in a more specialized role. You're coming in, regardless of what your title actually says, you're coming in as a generalist. We don't believe in engineers that can't jump on sales calls, and we don't really believe in bringing on salespeople that can't at least have some level of product thinking. So we sell them on the team and the exposure to sort of all the different problems that happen in a startup, which connects back to my point about we want them to be future founders, ideally, or future GMs or whatever, and we'll help them on their way. And then the third thing is, we'll actually walk the walk in terms of providing them autonomy. Whatever tools they need, we care about the outcomes, not the output. And every company says that in a JD, but we'll literally be like, okay, if you want to go get like 100 leads a day as a salesperson, where previously we only did like 15, right? Like, what do you need to scale it up? We'll set that up for you. And that also gives us then the advantage in terms of thinking about our headcount and comp structure, which is sort of the background of this, right? We've realized that it is now far more feasible for a company at our stage and our size to bring on candidates at market or above market salaries, because we plan to hire probably about half the headcount that we would have even 3 years ago. And that doesn't mean we are shrinking our spend on the team. In fact, it allows us to do a lot more, whether that's in terms of comp structures or tools, technology, VAs, whatever it is, to help them lever up and sort of punch 5-10 times above their weight.
That's awesome. So last question, what's next for you guys? We're going into 2025, ending the year. What's on your mind? What are the big challenges? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I would say 2025 is a really big year for us. I think we're hitting an exciting point in the company's history where we started with this germ of an idea, right? Which is, if you talk to customers, you will actually be able to make a meaningful impact on your business. Like any startup, you have to prove that. And in our last 2 years of existence, we've gone from zero to serving, millions of residents across the country and showing our customers. We now have actual studies from our customers that are starting to see sort of both the financial and the reputational impact of using us as a service for the residents, and then understanding what they actually want. This is when things actually get exciting in our industry, because it's an industry that more or less operates completely on social proof, right? You can't sell technology to a legacy industry by saying you're going to change the world. They're not going to trust you, but they do trust other people that are already seeing those wins. And so now we're at a point where we have customers who are already experiencing millions of dollars in positive impact to the value of their assets, and residents who are sort of seeing the side effects of that and the downstream effects of having much better living experiences, because they're actually getting what they asked for instead of being thrown stuff that people hope works to get them to stay. And so it is starting to really explode from a customer and growth point of view. Like, people are coming in asking us about what we're doing now, which is a thing that never happens in our industry, right? Like, people in real estate don't Google for solutions. They talk to other people in real estate. That is actually starting to happen. And so we are finally entering a new place where the biggest focus for us is to create a new kind of customer insights layer on top of the biggest industry in the world, right? We have the raw data, we have the tech, we have the scale, and now we have the variety of customers to actually go from concept to actual impact on everybody's financial outcomes. And so we are looking to grow aggressively to hit that demand. Honestly, like, we're having a hard time keeping up with the number of customers that want to understand their residents. So we're growing and adding sort of folks on the engineering side and on the sales side to help us understand that demand and actually help some of the largest residential operators in the world transform how they think about residents. And this is how change happens in the industry, right? There's a sort of idealist thinking about real estate. Nobody has ever disputed that being a renter sucks, but everybody's tried to approach it from the wrong wedge, we think, which is giving renters like anonymous forums to complain about landlords and things like that. It's a very consumer approach to something that doesn't ultimately matter to the industry, right? We are finally making the argument that, surprise, a better customer experience is actually more money in your pocket. And by doing that, we're finally getting the industry and the customer to go to sort of the same mutually beneficial place. All of that has started to come together, and we think that 2025, looking ahead, is going to be one of our biggest years yet. In terms of, well, no, not one of, it's going to be our biggest year yet. We're actually going to show real estate that customer insights can have just as much, if not more, of an impact than financial analysis, and make everybody's lives better in the process.
That's really cool. Well, congrats on the momentum. Rooting for you guys. Everyone, my guest today was Arjun, co-founder of ResiDesk. Thanks again, Arjun.
Thank you.